Hey guys, tonight let's all do that thing where we dim the lights, put the phone face down, and pretend tomorrow doesn't exist. Get comfortable, stretch a little, blink slowly, and as always, if you drift off halfway through, that means I did my job correctly. Tonight's story isn't ancient Rome or medieval royalty. It's something much more modern, almost aggressively modern, but spiritually, it has all the ingredients we love: arrogance, money, a historic property, and someone who absolutely should not be trusted with either power or a sledgehammer. So let's gently wander over to the sun-baked hills, where Villa Mariposa has been standing for just over 300 years. 3 centuries of earthquakes, wars, bad wallpaper decisions, and one truly tragic avocado green kitchen in the 1970s. And somehow, against all odds, it survived. Mostly because of Catherine Vale. Catherine was not born into wealth. She wasn't royalty, no tiaras, no tragic chin inherited from 5 generations of bad marital planning. She was a developer, which sounds boring until you realize she specialized in the kind of properties everyone else wanted to bulldoze. Old villas, cracked tiles, hand-painted ceilings that looked like they'd been done by a monk with emotional issues. Catherine loved those places. She loved them the way some people love rescue dogs with anxiety and missing teeth. Villa Mariposa was her biggest project yet. 2 years earlier, when most investors took one look at the villa and suggested turning it into luxury condos with a minimalist vibe, Catherine bought it anyway. The roof leaked, the plumbing hissed like it was offended by modernity, and the west wing smelled faintly of damp stone and regret. Of course, she was told to demolish it. Of course, she didn't. For 2 long, quiet, financially terrifying years, Catherine restored the villa piece by piece. She tracked down original artisans. She refused to replace hand-carved balustrades with glass. She kept the old citrus grove instead of paving it into a driveway for cars that had never seen dirt. It nearly ruined her. There was a divorce in there somewhere, a very polite one, the kind where both people say we just grew apart while quietly dividing bookshelves and emotional damage. Money got tight, contractors quit, one tile shipment fell off a truck and vanished into the universe. Still, Catherine stayed. By the time Villa Mariposa was finished, it wasn't flashy, it wasn't trending on social media, but it was whole again, solid, calm, like a place that knew exactly who it was and didn't need neon lighting to prove it. And that's when Logan showed up. Logan was young, painfully young, the kind of young where success arrives before perspective does. He made his money in crypto, which is modern shorthand for a lot of money appeared very fast and no one is quite sure why. He wore sneakers that cost more than Catherine's first car. He spoke in confident bursts. He said things like brand energy and meta potential. He laughed at his own jokes. A lot. When he toured the villa, he nodded aggressively. He said he loved the bones, which is always concerning. People who talk about bones are usually thinking about replacing them. Still, the offer was good, the contract was tight, and Catherine made sure of one very important thing. Addendum 14B, the Historical Integrity and Preservation Clause. It was written in dry, unromantic legal language, but its meaning was simple. If the buyer intended to damage, alter, or destroy the historic elements of the property, the seller could cancel escrow immediately. No drama, no refunds. He signed it without reading, because of course he did. Now, let's drift forward to the final week before the sale closed. The villa was quiet. Catherine was tying up loose ends, packing her office, touching walls like someone saying goodbye without making it weird. That's when the gates opened. Logan arrived early, very early. Technically, he wasn't allowed on the property unsupervised yet. Minor detail. He rolled in with a crew, blasting music, talking loudly about vision. He walked the grounds like he already owned them, which, in his mind, he did. Catherine was by the pool when it happened. She was wearing old jeans, a faded t-shirt, hair tied back. She had been checking the filtration system because the villa, despite its age, was very proud of its pool. Logan saw her and made a decision. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't consider the possibility that the woman calmly adjusting the pump might be, say, the owner. Instead, he clacked once loudly and said, "Hey, pool girl, can you make sure this thing's heated by tonight?" Pool girl. Catherine paused. Not dramatically, just enough to breathe. She looked at him. Really looked. The watch, the grin, the absolute certainty that the world was staffed entirely for his convenience. She nodded. "Sure," she said, "because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let someone underestimate you completely." Logan wandered off, already on his phone. He was live streaming, telling his followers he'd snagged this ancient place and was about to bring it into the future. He laughed about tearing out creepy old doors. He joked about sledgehammers. Catherine listened. Over the next few hours, Logan did what Logan did best. He ignored rules, he moved furniture, he marked walls with tape. He talked about permits he basically already had, which was interesting because he didn't. By the afternoon, Catherine had learned a lot, mostly by being invisible. Staff uniforms have that effect. People say everything around you, especially when they think you don't matter. She slipped away and made a call. Saul answered on the second ring. Saul had been her lawyer for years. He spoke slowly, thought carefully, and enjoyed nothing more than watching arrogant people legally implode. She told him what Logan was saying about the permits, about the demolition, about the live stream. Saul went quiet. Then he sighed, softly, happily. "He filed for structural demolition permits last week," Saul said. Catherine closed her eyes. "That's before closing," she said. "Correct, which is fraud and a material breach." Addendum 14B stretched its arms and woke up. By evening, the villa was buzzing. Logan had decided to host a party. Influencers, neon lights, a DJ booth derangeously close to a 17th century fresco. Catherine stayed. She moved through the chaos quietly, locked the wine cellar, checked doors, made sure nothing irreplaceable walked away with someone who thought history was an aesthetic. Logan went live again. He mocked the villa, mocked his owner, said she was old school, said she didn't get it. Catherine stood near the back, holding a tray, listening. At exactly 42:09 p.m., Saul texted, "Ready when you are." Catherine smiled, just a little, because the thing about people like Logan is they always think the party is about them, and it never is. But that comes next. For now, let's just sit here by the pool. The water is still, the villa is watching, and for the first time all day, Catherine isn't pretending to be anyone else. All right, let's ease back in. Same villa, same night. The music is still thumping, but just softly enough that it feels like a distant headache rather than an emergency. If you're half asleep already, perfect. Nothing urgent is about to happen, just a long, gentle unraveling. By the time the party was fully underway, Villa Mariposa barely recognized itself. There were LED uplights washing over 300-year-old stone like it was a nightclub wall. Someone had draped a neon sign reading "Hodl the Dream" over a carved wooden archway that had survived 2 revolutions and 1 very opinionated bishop. Catherine watched it all with the calm of someone who had already read the ending. She moved slowly through the crowd, tray balanced easily in her hands. Glasses clinked. People shouted compliments at each other. No one looked at the ceiling. No one noticed the fresco. That was fine. Frescoes were patient. Logan was in his element. He stood near the DJ, phone raised, narrating his own life like a documentary no one had asked for. He talked about disruption, about tearing things down to build them back cleaner. He joked about bribing the Historical Society with a nice dinner and some NFTs. People laughed, because laughing is easier than thinking. Catherine paused near the bar, where Alina and Elena were working. They had been hired last minute through a catering agency.
Both had figured things out quickly. They'd seen Catherine earlier, quietly redirecting drunk guests away from fragile areas. They'd seen her lock doors that shouldn't be opened. Elena leaned in slightly. "You own this place," she murmured, not a question. Catherine nodded once. Elena raised an eyebrow, slow and impressed. "Good," she said, "because this guy is a lot." Yes, he was. Logan clinked his glass and called for attention. The DJ lowered the music just enough to pretend this was intentional. Logan smiled wide. He launched into a speech. He thanked his amazing community. He thanked the universe. He thanked himself indirectly several times. He gestured broadly at the villa and called it a blank canvas. Catherine inhaled through her nose. Blank canvas, of course. He joked again about demolition, about how some walls just have to go. He said the previous owner had been emotional about the place, which was funny, apparently. Phones were up, streaming, recording. Saul would appreciate that later. Catherine set her tray down and stepped away from the wall. She wasn't rushing. There was no need. She checked her phone. One missed call. Saul again. Everything was ready. The paperwork had been sent digitally. The notice of cancellation was airtight. The fraud alone would have been enough. Addendum 14B just made it poetic. Catherine walked toward the DJ booth. Logan didn't see her at first. He was busy grinning into a camera, promising the sickest remodel this town has ever seen. Catherine waited patiently. When she reached the booth, she leaned in and spoke to the DJ, calm, polite, the way someone does when they're about to end your entire evening. "Cut the music," she said. The DJ blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Now," Catherine repeated. There was something in her voice, not loud, just final. The music stopped. The silence rolled out slowly, like fog. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone laughed awkwardly, then stopped. Logan turned. "What? Hey, no, bring that back," he said, waving a hand. "We're not done here." Catherine stepped forward. She set her phone on the table, screen facing up, the cancellation notice displayed clearly, her name at the top, the villa's address beneath it. "Actually," she said, "we are." Logan squinted. "Who are you?" he asked, genuinely confused. Catherine smiled, softly. "I'm Catherine Vale, owner of Villa Mariposa." There it was. A ripple moved through the crowd. Someone whispered. Someone else checked their phone. Logan laughed, too quickly. "Right, okay, cute. But this is my place now. We're in escrow." "Were," past tense. She tapped the screen. "You filed for demolition permits before closing. That's fraud. You also publicly stated your intent to destroy protected historical features. That triggers Addendum 14B. Logan's smile slipped, just a little. That's not a thing. My guy said." "Your guy was wrong," Catherine replied. She turned slightly so the room could hear. "Escrow is canceled, effective immediately." Silence again. Someone near the back quietly set down a drink. Logan's face flushed. "You can't just— This is my party," he said. "I have guests." "Yes," Catherine agreed, "and they need to leave." Logan scoffed, loudly, desperately. "This is insane. You're going to regret this." Catherine nodded. "I'm sure you believe that." She gestured toward the door. 2 uniformed officers stood just inside the gate, not dramatic, just present. Catherine had called earlier, quietly, preparedly. "This is private property," she said. "You are all trespassing." The word hung there, heavy, unfashionable. People started moving, slowly at first. Influencers are very good at exiting situations once they realize they're not the main character anymore. Logan stood frozen. "This isn't over," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. Catherine met his eyes. "No," she said, "it is." By 10:17 p.m., the villa was quiet again. The lights were off, the DJ was gone, the neon sign lay unplugged against a wall looking embarrassed. Catherine walked the grounds once more, checking, touching, making sure everything was still where it belonged. She stopped by the pool. The water reflected the moon, calm, unbothered. She sat down, took off her shoes, let her feet hover just above the surface. 2 years of work, 2 hours of chaos, and one very clear ending. Villa Mariposa was safe. Catherine exhaled, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something settle back into place. Not just the house, herself. We'll let that moment stretch out. No rush, nothing left to prove.
All right, welcome back. If you fell asleep somewhere around the neon sign being unplugged, that's ideal. Nothing sharp or exciting happened after that. Just the slow, soothing administrative collapse of someone who thought contracts were a vibe instead of a rule. When the last car rolled down the gravel drive and the gates closed behind it, Villa Mariposa exhaled. That's not a poetic exaggeration. Old houses really do that. They creak, they settle, they make tiny noises like they're gossiping about what just happened. Catherine stood alone in the courtyard for a while longer than necessary. There was no applause, no victory music, just the fountain doing what it had done for centuries, quietly moving water from one place to another with no interest in crypto or personal branding. Eventually, she went inside. The villa felt different now. Not triumphant, just restored to its natural state. Calm, slightly judgmental, dimly lit in a way that made you lower your voice automatically. Catherine poured herself a glass of water. She didn't touch the wine. Tonight wasn't for celebration, it was for decompression. Her phone buzzed. Saul, of course. Police report filed, cancellation logged. He's done. Catherine smiled, just a fraction. She typed back a simple, "Thank you." Saul responded with a thumbs-up emoji. He had been using the same one since 2012 and saw no reason to stop now. She set the phone down and wandered through the rooms, not inspecting, just reconnecting. The library smelled like old paper and citrus oil. The restored staircase caught the light exactly the way she remembered hoping it would 2 years ago when it was still wrapped in scaffolding and doubt. In the master bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself feel tired. Not the dramatic kind, just the deep, bone-level fatigue that comes from holding your ground quietly for a very long time. Outside the villa, the world was already reacting. Logan's live stream had cut abruptly, which never looks good. Clips circulated anyway. Him laughing, him joking about sledgehammers, him confidently promising destruction of a protected site like it was a feature, not a lawsuit. Then the silence. Then the comments. Crypto spaces move fast. Loyalty is thin. Confidence evaporates the moment consequences appear. By morning, hashtags had shifted, not in his favor. Catherine didn't watch any of it. She made coffee. Strong, practical. She drank it on the terrace as the sun rose over the hills and lit the villa's walls the way they were meant to be lit, naturally, without filters. Danny arrived around 8. Danny was her assistant, young, sharp, always 2 steps ahead technologically, but deferential in a way that came from genuine respect, not fear. He took one look at her and grinned. "So," he said, "I saw the clips." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Did you?" she said. "You're trending," Danny added, "not by name, but by legend." She sighed. "Please tell me no one called it a girl boss moment." Danny winced. "Someone did," he admitted, but they were immediately corrected. Good. They sat at the long table in the kitchen going over logistics. Saul would file follow-ups. The Preservation Council had already been notified. The demolition permits were officially voided, flagged, and under review. Logan's development company, if it could still be called that, was being asked some uncomfortable questions. Everything was moving exactly as it should. Slowly, properly.
By noon, a black SUV drove past the gates and did not stop. Catherine noticed, but didn't comment. That was the thing about power when it was done correctly. It didn't need acknowledgement. It just existed, solid and unbothered. Later that afternoon, Catherine walked the grounds again, this time with a notebook. She sat beneath the old jacaranda tree and wrote down ideas. Not urgent ones, gentle ones. A residency program, a cultural trust, maybe partnerships with historians, artists who understood restraint. Via Mariposa didn't need to be sold to someone who wanted to conquer it. It needed someone who wanted to listen. As for Logan, his week unraveled in predictable fashion. His investors went quiet, then distant, then gone. A few tried to spin the story, claimed he was misunderstood, that it was all a setup, that the old owner was bitter and manipulative. Those narratives didn't last. The permit filings were public record, the contract clause was clear, the live stream existed, reality, inconveniently, was documented. By Friday, Logan posted an apology video. It was not good. He stared into the camera with the haunted look of someone reading regret off a teleprompter. He said words like learning experience and growth. He didn't mention Catherine by name. He didn't mention the villa. He blamed timing. Timing rarely accepts responsibility. Catherine didn't watch the full video. Danny summarized it in 3 sentences, and that was more than enough. That evening, Saul came by in person. He brought a bottle of wine, a good one, old, appropriate. They sat in the courtyard as the light softened. Saul said, finally, "You did everything right, you know that." Catherine nodded. "I know," she said. "I just wish it hadn't come to that." Saul smiled, thin and knowing. "People like him," Saul said, "always bring it to that." They drank quietly. The villa listened. In the days that followed, Catherine slept better than she had in months. Not longer, just deeper. The kind of sleep that doesn't rehearse conversations or replay moments. The kind that trusts the morning will arrive without supervision. She received letters, actual letters, from neighbors, from the local historical society, from people who had heard what happened and wanted to say thank you, in ink. One note stood out. It was short, written carefully. "This house remembers you," it said, "and you remembered it." Catherine folded it and placed it in the desk drawer in her old office. Some things didn't need to be shared. On Sunday afternoon, she returned to the pool, the same one where she'd been mistaken for staff, the same one that had quietly observed everything. She sat at the edge again, same spot, different weight in her chest. The water shimmered, patient, unimpressed by drama. Catherine dipped her feet in this time, just enough. She stayed there until the sun began to lower, until the villa cast long shadows that looked like arms stretching after a nap. There was no sequel planned, no comeback tour, no viral victory speech. Just a woman, a house, and the quiet satisfaction of having drawn a line and watched it hold. Via Mariposa would stand a while longer, and so would Catherine. We'll leave them here, in the soft, ordinary peace that comes after something is defended properly. No cliffhanger, no tease. Just the end of a long day. You can rest now.
All right, let's keep going. No sudden noises, no twists, just the slow, comfortable continuation of a story that has already decided how it feels about itself. If part 3 felt like an ending, that's because it was, emotionally. But history, personal or otherwise, never really stops. It just drifts into paperwork, routine, and reflection. And that, honestly, is where the most revealing parts tend to live. In the week after the party that wasn't, Villa Mariposa settled into something like recovery mode. Old buildings do this. After stress, they respond the way bodies do. Tiny cracks relax. Wood stops complaining. The plumbing, previously dramatic, behaved itself out of sheer relief.
Catherine noticed. She woke early most mornings now, not from anxiety but from habit. The villa caught the dawn beautifully, and she had missed that while bracing herself for impact. She'd make tea, walk the halls barefoot, and open windows one by one like a quiet ritual. Air in, stagnation out. Nothing rushed her anymore. Danny handled the digital side of the fallout. Emails, requests, a surprising number of interview inquiries, all politely declined. Catherine had no interest in being framed as a symbol. Symbols got flattened. She preferred to remain inconveniently real. Saul checked in every other day, always brief, always calm. There were no new fires to put out, just embers cooling exactly as predicted. Logan's situation continued its gentle downward slope. Not a crash, not a spectacle, just a steady erosion of relevance. His name stopped trending, then stopped being mentioned at all, which, for someone like Logan, was far worse than outrage. Outrage could be monetized. Silence could not. A few weeks later, Catherine heard, through Saul, who heard everything, that Logan had sold off several assets to cover legal fees. He'd relocated, somewhere vague, somewhere with better weather and fewer preservation boards. Catherine acknowledged the information and moved on. She wasn't interested in his suffering, only in his absence. Meanwhile, Villa Mariposa began attracting a different kind of attention. Architectural journals reached out. Historians asked for tours. Students wrote hopeful letters asking if they could visit the house that didn't get demolished. Catherine allowed a few, carefully, with rules. No touching the frescoes, no leaning on the balustrades, no calling the villa content. People complied, mostly because Catherine asked in a way that assumed obedience as the baseline. One afternoon, the local preservation council visited in person. 3 members, sensible shoes, serious expressions softened immediately upon entering the courtyard. They walked slowly, reverently. They noticed things Logan never had: the stonework, the proportions, the way the house seemed to breathe. One of them stopped near the archway where the neon sign had hung. "You saved this," he said quietly. Catherine shrugged. "It wasn't mine to lose," she replied. That answer followed her around for a while. In quieter moments, Catherine allowed herself to think about the 2 years that led here. The nights she'd sat alone in her office, spreadsheets open, wondering if stubbornness and integrity were just expensive personality traits. The contractors who'd told her she was sentimental, the investors who'd walked away when she refused to compromise. She thought about the marriage, too, the way it had ended, not in betrayal, but in exhaustion. 2 people realizing they wanted different speeds, different silences. At the time, it had felt like failure. Now it felt like clearing space. One evening, Catherine found herself in the West Wing. The damp smell was gone now, replaced by clean stone and faint citrus. She sat on the windowsill and watched the sky darken, slowly, without urgency. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was bracing for the next thing. The villa had taught her that. Old structures didn't panic. They endured. They adapted carefully. They survived by refusing to rush. That lesson stayed. Weeks passed. The season shifted almost imperceptibly. Light angled differently through the windows. Shadows grew longer in the afternoons. Catherine began drafting plans. Not development plans, stewardship plans. A trust, educational partnerships, limited public access, slow use, respectful use. Villa Mariposa would not become a museum frozen in time, but it wouldn't become a spectacle either. It would remain lived in, just thoughtfully. Danny helped, enthusiastically. He brought ideas, digital archives, virtual tours that didn't require physical intrusion. He learned quickly what Catherine would and wouldn't tolerate. "No merch," she said at one point. Danny nodded solemnly. I promised absolutely no tote bags. Good. One afternoon, Alina and Elena returned, not for work, just to say hello. They brought pastries, store-bought, unpretentious. They sat in the courtyard and talked about normal things, jobs, families, the strange energy of that night. "You were very calm," Elena said eventually. Catherine smiled. "I was very prepared," she replied. That distinction mattered. When they left, Catherine lingered in the courtyard a while longer, the chairs still warm from the sun, the air heavy with late afternoon quiet. She realized something then. The victory hadn't been the confrontation. It hadn't been watching Logan shrink under legal language or seeing the party dissolve. The real victory was this: the return to stillness. The house unchanged, her sense of self intact. In another life, Catherine might have sold the villa quickly, taken the money, walked away. No one would have blamed her. But then, Villa Mariposa would have become a cautionary tale, another before photo, another loss explained away as progress. Instead, it stood, and Catherine stood with it. Late one evening, Catherine found herself back by the pool again. It had become a habit, not a symbol, just a place she liked to think. She remembered Logan's voice, pool girl. The memory no longer stung. It barely registered. Labels only had power when you accepted them. Catherine dipped her hand into the water and watched the ripples spread, then disappear. That's how things were supposed to work. Actions, consequences, calm. There was no moral carved in the stone, no lesson spelled out, just the quiet proof that patience, preparation, and knowing your rights could still matter in a world obsessed with speed. Villa Mariposa would outlast trends. It always had. And Catherine, older, steadier, unapologetically herself, had learned how to do the same. We'll continue on in part 5, drifting a little further into the future. Not far, just enough to see what happens when a hard-won piece is allowed to breathe. For now, stay here. Let the quiet do what it does best.
All right, let's ease into this next stretch. Nothing urgent, nothing loud, just time doing what time does best when no one is yelling at it. Moving forward at a pace that feels almost polite. A few months passed. Not the kind of months marked by big announcements or dramatic shifts, just the regular ones, the kind where you notice the light has changed, or that you're reaching for a sweater you didn't need last week. Villa Mariposa moved through them with practiced grace. Catherine settled into a rhythm that felt earned. She no longer woke up with that sharp inventory list running in her head, no mental spreadsheets before coffee, no rehearsed conversations with people who weren't even there yet. Mornings were for walking the grounds, checking on the citrus trees, and occasionally standing very still in rooms she'd fought to restore, just to confirm they were still real. They always were. The trust paperwork progressed, slowly, intentionally. Sal insisted on precision. Catherine agreed. Anything designed to protect something for the long term should take a little while to finalize. Rushing was how mistakes happened. The Villa Mariposa Preservation Trust, as it would eventually be called, was not flashy. It had no slogan, no brand colors, just a charter, a board with actual historians on it, and very specific language about what could and could not ever be done to the property. No demolition, no structural alterations without review, no temporary installations that had a habit of becoming permanent. Definitely no metacaves. Catherine smiled faintly every time she read that section. Visitors came, but sparingly. A graduate seminar from the university, a pair of restoration architects who spoke in hushed tones like they were in a cathedral, a journalist or two, always supervised, always gently redirected away from anything resembling sensationalism. Most people behaved. Those who didn't simply weren't invited back. Catherine had become very comfortable with that.
Danny continued to be indispensable. He organized archives, digitized records, and quietly filtered out requests that would have drained Catherine's energy for no meaningful reason. He learned how to say no politely but firmly, which is a skill that takes years for most people. "You're very good at this," Catherine told him one afternoon. Danny looked up from his tablet. "At saying no?" "At knowing when to," she said. He nodded, pleased. They worked well together. Different generations, different instincts, same respect for the place. Occasionally, Catherine would hear Logan's name mentioned in passing, usually through Sal, usually without context. "Another lawsuit settled," Sal would say, or "he's pivoting." Catherine never asked for details. Logan had receded into that vague category of people who once loomed large and then didn't. History was full of them, loud figures who mistook volume for permanence. Villa Mariposa had seen worse. One evening, Catherine hosted a small dinner. Not a party, definitely not a party. Just 6 people, long tables, simple food, good bread, wine that didn't need to impress anyone. They talked about architecture, about responsibility, about how easily history could be erased by people who saw land as a blank canvas instead of a conversation. No one raised their voice, no one checked their phone. Afterward, Catherine cleaned up herself, slowly, methodically. There was something grounding about washing plates in a house that had outlived empires. Later that night, she wandered into the library and pulled down an old ledger, one of the villa's earliest records. Names, transactions, notes written in careful, looping script. People had lived here, argued here, made terrible decisions here, and yet the house remained. Catherine traced a finger along the margin. She wasn't preserving perfection, she was preserving continuity. That distinction mattered. As autumn leaned in, the air sharpened slightly. The citrus trees relaxed. The villa took on that quiet, inward-focused mood old places get when the year begins to wind down. Catherine spent more time indoors now, reading, writing, planning without urgency. She started journaling again, not for documentation, just for herself. Thoughts that didn't need to be efficient or actionable. Observations, small realizations. One entry was particularly brief. "Strength doesn't announce itself, it holds." She closed the notebook and didn't add anything else that day. Around this time, a letter arrived, with no return address. Inside was a single page. "I used to think winning meant being louder than everyone else," it read. "Now I think it means knowing when to stop." No signature. Catherine folded it and placed it in the same drawer as the earlier note, the drawer of things that felt complete. She didn't speculate about who sent it. The sentiment was enough. Life, after all, had a way of offering closure without explanation. One afternoon, Catherine walked the perimeter of the property with a surveyor. Routine check. No changes, no concerns. As they paused near the gate, the surveyor glanced back at the villa. "You know," he said, "most people would have sold this the moment the money was good." Catherine considered that. "Yes," she said, "most people would have." The surveyor nodded, satisfied, and made a note. That was the thing. Catherine wasn't interested in being most people anymore. She had tried that once. It hadn't fit. As the year edged towards its end, Villa Mariposa hosted its first small educational residency. 3 scholars, 1 artist, all selected carefully, all briefed thoroughly. They lived on site for a month, studied, sketched, wrote, left quietly. One of them thanked Catherine before departing. "You gave us space," he said. "That's rare." Catherine inclined her head. "It's valuable," she replied. After they left, the villa returned to silence. Not emptiness, silence. There's a difference. Catherine noticed how easily she slipped back into it. No rebound anxiety, no sense of loss, just balance. That night, she stood on the terrace and looked out over the darkened grounds. The sky was clear, the stars unobtrusive. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, tired, defensive, constantly explaining herself. She felt no urge to apologize to that version of herself, only gratitude. Villa Mariposa had been a mirror as much as a project. It had asked her to slow down, to listen, to trust restraint over spectacle. She had learned, and learning, she realized, didn't have to be loud either. The house lights clicked off one by one as Catherine made her final round. Doors locked, windows secured, everything where it should be. She paused once more by the pool. Still water, familiar reflection. No one mistook her for staff anymore. Not that it mattered. Labels had lost their grip. Catherine sat for a moment, wrapped in a light sweater, and watched the surface ripple as a leaf drifted down and touched it. Then she stood, calm, certain. Villa Mariposa rested behind her, unchanged, enduring. And Catherine walked back inside, carrying the kind of peace that doesn't need defending. We'll continue in part 6, just a little further, just enough to see how quiet decisions echo over time. No rush, you're doing fine.